I'm David Costa, and I'm going to read the first place winning story for the older students category. The author is Sydni Wynter. She's an 11th grader at Episcopal High School, and the title of her story is Picture Perfect. Stepping out of the car to view the view of an unfamiliar house that would be mine for some unknown amount of time always gave me the same sense of bleakness. Although there was a chance that this may work out differently from the others, I couldn't ignore the pit that I felt in my stomach. Being 14 and a foster child was difficult to say the least, but being adopted at 14 was even worse. It's a crucial age, discovering who you are and coming to terms with it. As I walked up the sidewalk of the suburban brick house, with its boastful garden covered in snow and dainty white picket fence, I found it hard to subdue the smile that formed upon my lips. For the first time in my 14 years, I felt at peace, and I had a good feeling about this place. When I finally reached the door, a sweet young couple answered the door, immediately wrapped their arms around me, jubilantly. After a slightly awkward but all-around amiable welcome, I went up to my new room to unpack my clothes. The night went rather smoothly, as did the next few days. When I wasn't in school, I was with the Johnsons, telling them stories about my childhood and establishing a sense of comfort and trust between us. The next week at school, there was a buzzing air of excitement over the students as winter break peeked around the corner. While I was in Mrs. Carter's class, Danielle, a small girl with a short blonde bob and a face always wreathed in a smile, leaned over the side of her desk and whispered to me, "Elle, how are you spending your winter break?" The question surprised me, as I hadn't had time to think about what I was going to do during break. Caught up with thinking, I forgot that Danielle had asked me the question, so I quickly replied, "I'm not sure. How about you?" She went on to ramble about how her family was going to go ski in the mountains and stay in a fancy cabin. As I tuned out the sound of her voice, I couldn't help but be jealous of her. Because I was constantly bouncing from house to house and family to family, I never had the experience of a real Christmas. But that was all going to change this year. I promised myself then and there that I was going to make this Christmas perfect. For the next few days, all I could think about was my plans for the holidays. I found myself daydreaming, imagining the Johnsons and me around a tall, obnoxiously decorated Christmas tree, covered from head to toe with large, boisterous ornaments, all sipping on piping hot chocolate and chewing warm and moist gingerbread cookies around the fireplace. As the holiday drew closer, I made sure Mrs. Johnson got the most of her items that I needed, and I began to decorate around the house. It was Christmas Eve, and I had just finished stringing lights around the white picket fence and placing the angel upon the tree. I made sure to wake up extra early the next day to begin cooking. The previous night, Ms. Johnson warned me that a snowstorm was set to hit today, so I set out early to finish decorating. I had just placed the gingerbread cookies in the oven when the storm began to hit. Ominous clouds quickly formed, and the snow began to cover the house. Before we knew it, the wind had picked up, and we could no longer see anything outside. Suddenly, as Mrs. Johnson and I were finishing our dinner preparations, a large crash came from outside, and the house fell dark. Mr. Johnson blindly made his way to the coat closet in the front of the house and quickly put on his boots and coat to assess the mysterious noise outside. Around 20 minutes later, he came back inside, placing his phone into his pocket. "Well, ladies, looks as if the blizzard knocked down a few of the power lines nearby, and my buddy who works at the electric company says that they won't be able to assess the damage until the storm passes through." As soon as the words left his lips, my stomach dropped. All plans of my faultless holiday went down the drain with just those few words. As the tears fell down my cheeks, I tried my hardest to subdue my somber mood in an attempt to salvage the holiday spirit. My attempts failed quickly, and Mrs. Johnson was by my side in minutes, comforting me. I know you wanted this holiday to go perfectly, but just because the power's out, that doesn't mean that we can't still have a nice Christmas, said a hopeful Mrs. Johnson. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and put on the best smile that I could muster. The Johnsons made their way aimlessly around the house to gather the supplies we needed. I got jackets and socks. Mrs. Johnson grabbed candles and a lighter, and Mr. Johnson searched for food. 20 minutes later, we met in the living room with the few things we could find. Mrs. Johnson began to light the candles around the room while I put my socks and coat on, and Mr. Johnson unloaded his findings. We ate our Christmas dinner, laughing through the entire meal. Later, as we sat around the living room floor telling corny stories, surrounded by candles and Pop-Tart wrappers, in front of a dark but festively decorated tree, I felt something I hadn't felt before. I felt genuinely happy, like I belonged, like I was part of something bigger than myself, a family, and that was the greatest gift I could have asked for. And that was the story Picture Perfect by Sydni Wynter, an 11th grader from Episcopal High School. That was the first place winner in the older students category.